It was just past 9 a.m. on a crisp Saturday morning, the kind of morning where the sun danced across manicured lawns and birds chirped above quiet, white-fenced houses, typical Greenridge Lane tranquility. I was walking back to my front porch with my coffee when it happened. A single deafening crack sliced through the calm like a whip. Time didn't slow, it shattered. My chest exploded in pain, the ceramic mug burst in my hand, and before I could process it, I was flat on the grass, warmth spreading beneath me, not from the sun, but from my own blood soaking the earth. The world blurred, sideways, and as I blinked up into the cloudless sky, I saw her, Karen Foster, the HOA president, standing at the end of my driveway, trembling, gun still smoking in her hand. Her mouth twisted as she screamed, "He threatened me. He came at me," even as the neighbors poured out of their homes, drawn by the noise. Someone shouted. A dog barked violently. Mrs. Halpern from across the street gasped and pulled her children back inside. Karen dropped the gun like it had betrayed her, eyes wide in faux horror. I tried to lift my head, tried to speak, but only a gurgle came out. The pain was unreal, every nerve on fire, and as I lay there dying in the yard I'd mowed 2 days ago, I had just one thought: how the hell did a disagreement about fence paint lead to this? The sirens grew louder, fast, cutting through the air like judgment. Someone pressed down on my chest, shouting at me to stay awake. I remember the panic in my neighbor Mark's eyes as he knelt beside me. "You're gonna be okay, Ray. Just breathe, man, breathe." But everything was dimming, edges fraying, light fading, and in that chaos, Karen stood frozen, mascara smudged, playing victim to a story she had rehearsed. As the paramedics ran in and voices turned to static, I closed my eyes. And now that I've lived to tell it, let me start from the beginning, because this wasn't just a shooting. It was a slow-burning war with the HOA, and Karen had just pulled the trigger, literally. Before the gunshot echoed through Greenridge Lane, before the ambulance sirens screamed through the morning, life was supposed to be quiet, peaceful. That's why we came to Willow Bend in the first place. My name is Ethan Cole, and after 20 years of running into burning buildings, I finally decided it was time to slow down. I'd seen too much: collapsed ceilings, crying mothers, children I couldn't save, and though my body still worked like a machine, my heart had grown tired. I wanted something better. Not just for me, but for Maya, my wife, and Zoe, our 10-year-old daughter with eyes too big for her face and a curiosity that could power a small city. We'd lived in downtown Raleigh for most of our lives, but after one too many sleepless nights filled with sirens, we packed up and found this so-called slice of heaven, Willow Bend. On the surface, it was everything we hoped for. The streets were lined with pear trees and lamp posts that looked like they belonged in a movie. Kids rode bikes with helmets too big for their heads, and every front yard seemed freshly mowed like a competition was going on. We bought a beautiful 2-story home at the end of Greenridge Lane with a wraparound porch and a massive oak tree that shaded the whole front yard. That tree? It was over 100 years old, thick, gnarled, and glorious. Zoe immediately nicknamed it Groot and made it her summer fortress. But paradise, as we'd learn, comes with rules, and rulers. Enter Karen Whitmore, the self-appointed queen of Willow Bend. Technically, she was the HOA president. In reality, she was a tyrant in yoga pants. She lived 3 houses down with her 2 spoiled poodles and an attitude bigger than her designer mailbox. Her smile was always too tight, like it had been glued on by someone who'd never actually experienced joy. From the moment we moved in, Karen made it clear that we were outsiders. I'd barely finished unloading boxes when she showed up with a clipboard in hand and a printed copy of the HOA handbook. "We're so glad you're here," she said through her teeth. Just a reminder that the mailbox color must be a standard Willow Bend sandstone, not this beige variant. Also, you'll want to address the paint chipping on your trim within 30 days to avoid a citation. She didn't say welcome. She said warning. Maya and I exchanged looks, but we smiled and nodded. We wanted to play nice. For a while, we tried. Maya joined the community gardening club. I helped fix the neighborhood fountain when it stopped working. Zoe made friends and sold lemonade in the driveway. Things almost felt normal. But then came the tree incident. 3 weeks into living there, I received an email from Karen, subject line, urgent, tree removal required. It was addressed formally, citing Code 3.14b of the Willow Bend HOA rules. The reason? The oak tree in your front yard poses a potential safety hazard due to its roots affecting sidewalk integrity. I knew that was a lie. That sidewalk was flat as glass. She just didn't like the tree. I responded politely. I offered to have the tree inspected by a certified arborist. I even offered to cover sidewalk repairs myself if they ever became necessary. But Karen wouldn't budge. If the tree isn't removed within 14 days, a fine of $150 per day will be applied, she wrote coldly. That's when I knew, it wasn't about safety. It was about control. And I don't play that game. I refused. I told her I wasn't cutting down a century-old tree just to satisfy her petty war on nature. That's when the citations began. First, it was the color of our patio furniture. Then the trash can left visible for more than 18 minutes after garbage pickup. A few days later, she claimed our American flag was mounted at a non-compliant height. It became absurd. Maya said we should ignore her. But each notice came with escalating threats, warnings, fines, and references to further action. I started documenting everything. Every email, every violation notice, every friendly neighborhood visit, from Karen where she'd show up on our lawn pretending to wave at kids but really just scoping out what she could file a complaint over. She was obsessed. This wasn't about one tree anymore, it had become personal. I'd challenged her authority, and that made me a threat. Still, we tried to hold our ground without causing a scene. I figured if we just stayed calm, followed the real rules, eventually she'd lose steam. But she didn't. Instead, she got worse. She began recruiting others, her little HOA clique. People who once waved now avoided eye contact. Maya was quietly removed from the garden club with no explanation. Zoe came home crying one afternoon because a neighbor's kid said they weren't allowed to play at our house anymore because their parents don't like your daddy. That was the first time I saw Maya cry over this neighborhood. I should have known then that this wasn't going to be a quiet life. I should have seen the writing on the wall. But part of me believed people like Karen couldn't really hurt you. I thought she'd run out of steam, find a new target, or just move on. But she didn't want control anymore. She wanted revenge. And what came next? I could have never seen coming. By mid-June, the tension on Greenridge Lane had curdled into something sharp and personal. It wasn't just about homeowner regulations anymore, it was about control, intimidation, and something darker that simmered just beneath Karen Holloway's polished suburban smile. The first wave came in envelopes. Certified letters from the HOA, each bearing a fine more absurd than the last, $250 for excessive vegetation on a bush that was trimmed weekly, $400 for a non-compliant American flag Ethan had proudly mounted on his front porch, a flag that had flown during his father's military funeral. Then came the warnings for having a child's basketball hoop too close to the street. A trip hazard, they called it. At first, Ethan and Maya thought it was just the HOA being overly picky. But then the notices got personal. Karen left handwritten notes on their mailbox. One read, "Maybe if you cared more about this neighborhood, you'd understand the rules." Another said, "We were fine before your kind moved in." That one made Maya tear up at the kitchen table. Ethan clutched the note so tight, it nearly shredded in his fist. They installed cameras, 4 in total. One over the driveway, 2 facing the front lawn, and another above the porch. Ethan uploaded everything to a secure cloud. He began logging every incident. Karen would march up to the edge of their lawn with her little Pomeranian and take pictures with her phone, of their flower beds, their mailbox, even their guests' license plates. Once, she stood in their driveway at 6 a.m., photographing Ethan's truck. Another time, Maya spotted her reaching under their porch light with a measuring tape. Maya opened the door and asked, "What are you doing on our property?" Karen just smirked and said, "Just making sure you're not violating the lighting code. It's for the community's safety, dear." They filed multiple complaints with the HOA board. Ethan even attended a community meeting, bringing photo evidence, timestamps, and the signed letters. He was calm but firm, explaining how Karen's behavior had crossed the line from neighborhood oversight into harassment. But the board just offered hollow nods and said they'd look into it. Behind closed doors, the whispers started. Neighbors who once waved across the street began looking the other way. The old man who jogged past their home each morning stopped. The mom who used to invite Maya to book club never texted again. Ethan realized something chilling. Karen wasn't just a resident, she was a queen bee. She hosted HOA potlucks, controlled the newsletter, and managed the community Facebook group. She shaped opinions. Silently, methodically, she was turning the entire neighborhood against them. Maya wanted to leave. She begged Ethan to consider moving. "This place, it's toxic. We can't raise Ava around this," she said, voice cracking, hand clutching her baby bump. But Ethan stood firm, jaw clenched with quiet rage. "If we leave, she wins. We pay our dues, we follow the rules, we have every right to be here." But Karen didn't stop. One evening, after a summer barbecue with family, Ethan walked out to find his front tire slashed. A week later, his trash bins were turned upside down, contents strewn across the driveway like a warning. He filed police reports, but with no cameras facing the curb, there was no proof. "Could be teenagers," the officer muttered. But Ethan knew better. The breaking point came on a Sunday morning. Maya was reading on the porch while Ava played with chalk on the sidewalk. Karen stormed up the walkway, eyes blazing, finger jabbing the air. "That sidewalk is HOA property. She can't mark it up like some inner-city ghetto." Ethan rushed out, stepping between them. "Back off, Karen." But she got right in his face, practically hissing, "People like you ruin this neighborhood." Her voice was sharp, loud, and the neighbors heard it. They peeked from behind curtains, watched from porches, but no one said a word. Not one. That night, Ethan filed his third official harassment report to the HOA, this time including camera footage and Maya's written testimony. He sent copies to the local police department. He even emailed a local news tip line. But 2 days later, a fresh citation arrived, $600 for unapproved lawn modifications. Karen was retaliating. And she wasn't hiding it anymore. As Ethan stood in his garage that evening, watching the sun dip below the rooftops, he realized the truth: this wasn't just harassment. It was psychological warfare. And something in Karen's eyes during that last confrontation chilled him to the core. She wasn't just trying to make them leave. She was trying to break them. Halloween in Willow Bend was always a big deal. Every porch on Greenridge Lane came alive with lanterns, candy bowls, cobwebs, and inflatable ghosts, every porch except one. Karen's house stood out like a sore thumb, cloaked in shadows, her porch light off, and her front yard fenced off with hastily assembled "Keep Out" signs scrawled in red paint. But kids, being kids, didn't always respect imaginary boundaries, especially when the entire neighborhood felt like a playground. As dusk turned into night, laughter and giggles filled the air. Little superheroes, witches, and ghouls ran from house to house collecting candy. 10-year-old Zoe, Ethan and Maya's daughter, skipped along with her group of friends, cutting across Karen's lawn like most kids did every Halloween. She didn't even notice the curtain twitching inside Karen's living room window. But Karen did. She always did. Suddenly, the front door flew open with a bang. Karen stormed outside, flashlight in hand like a spotlight, shouting, "Get off my lawn. You little monsters have no respect." Startled, the kids scattered like leaves in the wind, some screaming, others crying. Zoe tripped on the curb and scraped her knee. Ethan, handing out candy from their porch, saw the commotion and rushed over. "Karen, what the hell is going on?" Ethan asked, kneeling to check on Zoe. "She was trespassing." Karen shrieked. "I told you people to control your kid. She's lucky I didn't call the police this time." Maya came out of the house, furious but composed. "Karen, she's a child. This is Halloween. You're yelling at kids for walking across grass." Karen narrowed her eyes. "That's not just grass. It's my property. Maybe you people don't understand boundaries." That struck a nerve. Ethan stood up slowly, squaring his shoulders. "We're not doing this tonight. You're threatening children now." As more neighbors gathered to see the scene, Karen's voice grew louder. "Your daughter vandalized my yard. Look at this." She marched toward her flower bed and pointed at an upturned pot and spray-painted stones with the word "witch" scrawled across one. "She did this." Zoe, still shaken, cried, "I didn't. I swear." Everyone stared in disbelief. The pot looked freshly broken, and the spray paint barely dried. But Maya, a sharp observer, noticed something off. "That pot wasn't even here yesterday. Did you just put this out?" A few neighbors started murmuring. Someone pulled out their phone. Another said, "I saw Karen setting something up earlier." Ethan took a deep breath, calming his rising anger. "You're planting fake evidence to blame a 10-year-old? Karen's face twitched. She looked caught. Then she sneered, "You think you're so clever, don't you? You and your little perfect family. You're going to regret ever moving here." The threat hung in the cold October air like smoke. Ethan stared at her, eyes narrowing. "That's enough. You're harassing my daughter, and this is all on video. Try anything else, and I swear we'll press charges." Karen didn't respond. She simply turned and slammed her door shut. Later that night, when the streets were quiet and candy bags emptied, Ethan stepped outside to check on things. That's when he saw it. His car tires had glinting metal sticking out from behind them. Nails. Carefully placed, pointed up. Someone had tried to sabotage his vehicle. He turned toward the fence and saw it too, black and red spray paint now streaked across the white wood. "Get out," in dripping letters. His fists clenched. It wasn't random. It wasn't neighborhood kids pulling pranks. This was targeted. This was personal. He called Maya out. She stared in disbelief. "She's escalating," she whispered. "This isn't petty anymore. This is sick." Ethan took photos, documented everything. He didn't sleep that night. Because somewhere inside Karen's darkened house, she wasn't sleeping either. She was watching. Planning. And the worst was yet to come. The morning air was thick with tension, though nothing outwardly gave it away. Ethan had barely slept the night before. His dreams were riddled with echoes of banging fists, HOA violation slips, and the unhinged voice of Karen screaming about petty yard decor infractions. But what really chilled him wasn't a dream, it was the note shoved through his mailbox at dawn: "Drop the complaints or else." No signature. Just those words scrawled in black marker on torn printer paper, creased and damp. His wife, Ellie, begged him not to leave the house. "Let the lawn grow," she said. "It's not worth it." But Ethan had always believed in standing firm. He wasn't about to be bullied into silence on his own property. By noon, the sun was brutal over Willow Bend, casting sharp shadows across his neatly edged lawn. He strapped on his old baseball cap, tugged the mower into the yard, and tried to ignore the paranoia creeping up his spine. The blades buzzed to life, a deafening white noise that barely masked the approaching footsteps. Then came the voice, that shrill, unmistakable screech. "Mowing again, Ethan? Still trying to impress your little friends on the HOA board?" He turned and there she was, Karen McAllister, storming across the cul-de-sac like a woman possessed, arms flailing, lips curled in contempt. Her eyes were red-rimmed, sunken. Something about her was different, unhinged. More than usual. "You think you can humiliate me?" she spat. "Telling people I'm abusing my power? That I'm corrupt?" Ethan kept his tone low. "Karen, I never said your name. I just filed complaints, about rules being broken, not people." But she was beyond logic. "They know it's me. Because you made it about me," she shrieked, stepping closer, now on the edge of his lawn. "You and your wife think you're so righteous. Always looking down your nose at me like I'm some crazy woman." Ethan dropped the mower handle and raised his hands slightly. "Karen, you're escalating something that doesn't need to go any further. I don't want any more problems." She took another step. Her purse jostled unnaturally at her side. "No more problems," she echoed, voice lowering into a dangerous whisper. "You're the problem." And then, she reached. A sudden lunge, fumbling into her oversized leather bag. For a moment, time seemed to suspend. Ethan instinctively stepped back, one hand still up. "Don't do this, Karen," he said, his voice trembling despite himself. "Please. Just walk away." But it was already too late. A flash of metal. A sharp click. Then the sound that would haunt every waking moment for the rest of his life, the crack of a gunshot, loud and final, echoing off the brick homes like a thunderclap. He felt the punch before he registered the pain. A searing heat tore through his abdomen, and then, weightlessness. His knees gave way. The sky above spun. He collapsed onto the sidewalk in front of his own home, one hand clawing at the wound, blood rushing between his fingers. Somewhere behind him, he heard the mower still humming. Somewhere in the distance, a scream, maybe Ellie's, maybe a neighbor's. Karen stood over him, gun dangling in her hand, breath shallow and wild. "You lunged at me," she muttered, more to herself than to anyone else. "He threatened me. I was defending myself." And just like that, she dropped the weapon, stepped back, and started screaming for help, the actress playing victim in a tragedy of her own creation. Ethan's vision blurred as sirens began to rise in the distance, the world narrowing into the sound of his own heartbeat pounding in his ears and the image of Karen's face, not with guilt, but with calculation. The fluorescent lights above Ethan's hospital bed cast a sterile glow over his pale face. Beeping machines tracked every shallow breath, every flutter of his heart. Maya sat at his side, her hands trembling as she clutched his fingers, the warmth barely returning to his skin. Tubes snaked into his arms and chest, a bandage wrapped tightly across his side where the bullet had torn through muscle, bone, and nearly ended his life. He was conscious, barely. But alive. And in those weary blinks, a fire still smoldered behind his eyes, not of pain, but of betrayal. Outside, a police officer stood guard. Not for protection, but because Ethan was under investigation. Karen had spun her story within hours of the shooting. She told the police she had been cornered, that Ethan had charged her after an argument on the front lawn. She claimed he was aggressive, unstable, a man who snapped and forced her to fire in self-defense. The bullet in his ribs? Her way of preserving her life. The HOA backed her version almost immediately. A formal statement was issued by the board, expressing deep regret for the incident, but describing Ethan as a repeated problem, a man who refused to follow community guidelines and had become increasingly hostile. Karen wasn't a violent woman, they insisted. She was a frightened resident forced to act. Maya heard these things while curled up in the hospital waiting room, surrounded by sterile coffee cups and cheap magazines. Her rage boiled under the surface, not just at Karen, but at the entire neighborhood that once smiled in passing and now whispered behind closed doors. They had written Ethan off. Written them off. But Maya wasn't built for retreat. She returned to their home the next day while Ethan lay in surgery. She couldn't breathe inside that house, but she needed something. Proof. The front door still held the bullet holes, the shattered lock. But more importantly, it held the camera. Ethan had installed a smart doorbell just a few months earlier, after the Halloween parade incident. He had grown paranoid, always telling her, "I just don't trust how far Karen's willing to go." At the time, Maya thought he was being cautious. Now, she knew he was being prophetic. She ripped the SD card from the slot and rushed home, her hands trembling as she loaded the footage onto her laptop. The first few minutes showed nothing more than a quiet morning. Birds. Leaves rustling. A few kids biking past. Then, Karen entered the frame. Gun drawn. Ethan opened the door calmly, unarmed, even smiling faintly at first. The sound cut through the footage like thunder, a single shot, echoing through the quiet lane. Ethan collapsed. There was no confrontation. No argument. No threat. Karen had lied. Maya's breath hitched in her throat. Her first instinct was to take it to the police, but she hesitated. This wasn't just a piece of evidence. This was a weapon. And in the hands of a system already tilted toward the word of a frightened suburban white woman versus a man like Ethan, she didn't trust it wouldn't be buried. Instead, she sent it to the one place she knew truth couldn't be ignored, the internet. She uploaded the footage to a secure drive, posted it with a clear caption, "My fiancé was shot on our porch." She said it was self-defense. This is what actually happened. The video spread like wildfire. Within hours, it was trending on Twitter. By midnight, it hit national news. Headlines screamed, "HOA resident shoots unarmed neighbor," and "Door cam footage exposes suburban lies." Civil rights lawyers reached out. Activists rallied. A wave of public outrage crashed into Willow Bend, sweeping away the HOA's carefully crafted narrative. The next morning, the police arrived at Karen's door, this time with a warrant. And while she wept, claimed confusion, blamed the stress of being harassed by Ethan for months, the footage had already spoken. Loudly. Unforgivingly. Maya stood by Ethan's bedside that night, the glow from her phone lighting up message after message from strangers, supporters, journalists, survivors. She didn't feel victorious. Not yet. Ethan still lay broken. The justice system still needed convincing. And the HOA hadn't said a word. But now the world was watching. And Karen couldn't hide anymore. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, neighbors, HOA officials, even strangers who had followed the story online, it felt like the entire town of Willow Bend had shown up to watch Karen's trial. I sat in the front row of the gallery, arm in a sling, bruises still vivid on my shoulder. Beside me, Maya held my hand tight. Her knuckles were white, but her expression was solid steel. She wasn't just here for me, she was here for every person who'd been bullied by power-hungry neighbors hiding behind HOA rules and fake victimhood. Karen sat at the defendant's table, dressed in a pale beige suit, her usual smug expression traded for something oddly blank. Her lawyer, a sharp, overly confident man named Mr. Silver, was already trying to twist the narrative. My client feared for her life, he claimed in his opening statement. She was harassed, stalked, and made to feel unsafe in her own neighborhood. On that fateful day, she believed she was defending herself. Maya clenched her jaw. My attorney leaned in and whispered, "Don't worry. The jury won't buy it once we get to the footage." The first few days were tense. Karen's legal team tried to weaponize the HOA complaint logs, those dozens of fabricated citations and written grievances, as proof that I had a pattern of hostility. They brought up everything: the Halloween parade, the so-called non-compliant decorations, even the fact that I'd once raised my voice in a board meeting. None of it mattered when the jury saw what they were really looking at: a coordinated campaign of character assassination, fueled by Karen's obsessive need for control. The prosecution played the street cam footage next. The grainy clip showed the exact moment I walked outside to greet the mailman, unarmed, hands visible, casual. Then Karen appeared from her SUV, aimed, and fired. Gasps filled the courtroom. The judge warned the gallery to remain silent. Even with the footage, Karen's defense didn't falter. Mr. Silver brought up "stand your ground" laws, claimed she mistook her purse for a threat, suggested she saw a glint of metal in my hands. I couldn't believe it. They were painting me as a threat in my own front yard. Then Maya took the stand. She was nervous at first, anyone would be, with all eyes on her, but once she began recounting the months of harassment, the false complaints, and Karen's open hostility, her voice turned firm. She wasn't scared of my husband, she said, locking eyes with the jury. She hated him. She hated that he stood up to her. That's why she shot him. The turning point came when a neighbor we didn't expect, Mark Danner, who lived 3 houses down, was called in. He had always been quiet, kept to himself. But now, he stepped up. "I saw it," he said. "I was outside, watering my lawn." He didn't threaten her. She walked up to him like she'd planned it. I didn't say anything before because I didn't want the HOA to come after me too. But I can't stay silent. Maya's eyes welled up. Mine did too. It was the first time in months we felt like someone, anyone, had our back. The prosecution pressed further, introducing emails between Karen and other HOA members, some of which had been anonymously leaked to the media. The language was damning: let's find something to use against him, maybe a safety violation, and worse. One email flat out stated, "He doesn't belong in this neighborhood. Let's make it so unbearable he leaves on his own." That email broke the case wide open. During cross-examination, Karen cracked. She started crying, but it wasn't sorrow, it was frustration. "I was trying to preserve order," she shouted. He didn't listen. He challenged me. "People like him think they can move into our streets and ignore the rules." The courtroom fell into stunned silence. "People like him?" the prosecutor asked calmly. "Care to clarify what you mean?" Karen fumbled, realizing her own mask had slipped. "I didn't mean, what I meant was," but it was too late. That phrase echoed in the courtroom long after it was said. The jurors exchanged glances. Even her lawyer sat back, as if conceding defeat. It took only 5 hours of deliberation. The verdict: guilty on all charges, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, reckless endangerment, and lying to law enforcement. Karen was sentenced to 15 years. But the collapse didn't stop there. The leaked emails had triggered a larger investigation. News outlets swarmed the HOA office. Within a week, 3 board members resigned. A federal oversight committee launched an inquiry into discriminatory HOA practices. Homeowners began showing up at meetings, demanding transparency. For the first time, people were listening. After the verdict, Maya and I walked out of the courthouse together, the sun breaking through the clouds. Reporters shouted questions, but we kept walking. We weren't interested in revenge. We were interested in healing, and rebuilding our life without fear. This wasn't just a courtroom win. It was a shift. A message. That no one, no matter how entitled or connected, gets to rewrite the truth, or shoot their way into power. The bullet had healed, mostly. At least the flesh. The scar it left across my ribs still ached some nights, but not as much as the memory. Not as much as the betrayal. Not as much as knowing I was shot in front of my own house, for existing. Maya held my hand through the worst of it, not just the surgery or the trial, but those silent nights when fear crept in like a draft under the door. Our daughter, Eliza, still had nightmares. She'd draw pictures of the house with a dark shadow standing across the lawn, always watching. But we kept showing up for each other. Every day. I had a choice: stay angry or rebuild. I chose to rebuild. And something strange happened. The silence in our neighborhood cracked. One by one, neighbors who had pretended not to see, they started speaking out. The Smiths next door admitted the HOA had fined them $500 for painting their shutters an unapproved shade of white. Mr. Langford, 2 doors down, had been threatened with foreclosure over a missing mailbox number. They all knew. They'd just been afraid. But after what happened to me, they weren't anymore. Maya, being Maya, took it further. She started a support group for HOA abuse victims. Online at first. Then in real community centers. People came in tears, in rage, with photos, letters, threats. All of them carrying some version of the same story: control disguised as order, cruelty under the mask of neighborhood standards. And as for me? I took the stand that day in court not just for justice, but to remind people that fear is how bullies win. Silence is how power gets abused. And peace, real peace, doesn't come from hiding. I still walk my lawn every morning. I wave to neighbors I barely knew before the gunshot changed everything. The grass is a little longer now, and the mailbox is a little crooked. No one says a word. Funny thing. All I ever wanted was peace. Turns out, standing your ground is the only way to get it. If you've ever felt bullied by a power-hungry HOA board or watched injustice unfold on your own street, your voice matters. Don't let silence protect the guilty. Share this video to expose the truth, drop your story in the comments to stand with others, and hit subscribe for more gripping stories where justice hits back harder than the lies. Together, we hold the line.